All right. Well, hello, everyone out there. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Aaron Mehta. I am Deputy Editor and Senior Pentagon Correspondent with Defense News. Very excited to be here at this event, particularly because I get to spend a couple minutes talking with Kingston Reif, the Director of Disarmament and Threat Reduction Policy at the Arms Control Association, and one of the many nuclear experts who I bug on a regular basis to pick his brain. So this is fun to be able to do it on camera. Kingston, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for
All
joining
right.
us, Aaron. Looking forward to this.
All right. So we have just a couple of minutes here that we can play around with. So we're going to try to hit as many things as we can. First, I want to thank the audience for joining us. We know there's a couple of other panels that you could have chosen to join. We appreciate you spending the time with us. We think you made a wise decision in that regard, not that we're biased. Feel free to start sending in questions. We want to have a couple of minutes at the end for Q&A. You can submit questions at any time via the Q&A function. It's at the bottom of your screen, right next to the little chat button. You should be able to see something that says Q&A. Just send things in there, and we'll try to get to them. We're going to start off just with a couple of opening comments, and Kingston will do the majority of the intellectual lifting, as you'd expect. But for my part, Kingston actually asked me to just talk a little bit about why I have chosen to cover nuclear issues, because it's not actually something that traditionally has fallen into our beat. Defense News has covered nuclear stuff in the past, of course, but not to the level of detail that I think we do now. And that's frankly because I think it's just frankly a really interesting beat, and it's one that is dramatically undercovered by the defense press here in Washington. Pretty much any defense, national security policy or strategy at this point, since 1945, really has been predicated on the question of nuclear weapons, what they could do to affect the battlefield, how they'd affect strategy. Everything's built around the fact that you have to account for nuclear weapons. At the same time, nuclear weapons just aren't written about that much. They aren't covered that much. Particularly the NNSA, the National Nuclear Security Administration, is almost non-existent in terms of having news written about it, even though it manages, all the warheads, the security, the development, modernization of these actual explosive devices. So to me, I think nuclear weapons are at the core of everything that the Pentagon does. Is essentially has to account for them. Everything down to even, do you use soft for a small raid, up to cyber attacks, up to great power competition. Nuclear gets involved in that in some way, shape, and form. So I think it's something that just has to be accounted for better than maybe it has been in the past. And I think, frankly, the Arms Control Association and similar groups have done a good job in recent years, particularly with the newest modernization push that started under the Obama administration to try to raise the profile a little bit. And I think for that, we all should thank them for their efforts and interest. Ultimately, people like me rely on people like Kingston to help sort out the technical aspects, the policy aspects. So I'm going to kick it over to him. What we're going to do is he's going to give some opening remarks here, and then we're going to have a couple of questions amongst us, and then we'll try to get to the questions that you submit. So with that, Kingston, go ahead.
Well, great. Thanks so much, Aaron, again, for joining us. Thanks for all your great work, not only on the defense beat writ large, but in covering and keeping us informed of news with respect to the U.S. nuclear enterprise. So let me start with some comments on how the Trump administration expanded the role of, capability of, and spending on the arsenal relative to the Obama administration, because this is the situation that the new Biden administration is going to inherit. Now, there's a view out there that the approach taken by the Trump administration has been generally consistent with what it inherited from its predecessor, but I don't think that's borne out by the facts. So in addition to continuing full steam ahead with the Obama administration's plans to replace the nuclear triad and its associated warheads in supporting infrastructure, the Trump administration proposed to double the number of low-yield nuclear options in the arsenal by fielding the W-76-2 and initiating development of the nuclear armed sea launch cruise missile, accelerate development of a third high-yield SLBM warhead known as the W-93, reverse plans to retire the highest yield warhead in the arsenal known as the B-83, and lay the groundwork to significantly increase the production of plutonium cores for nuclear warheads known as plutonium pits. The Trump administration also envisioned a greater role for nuclear weapons against a broader range of threats, including by expanding the circumstances under which the United States would consider the first use of nuclear weapons. To make matters worse, the administration undermined key arms control guardrails, especially by putting the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or New START, on the brink of expiration and resorting to wild threats of a new arms race in a failed attempt to coerce Russia and China to the negotiating table to capitulate to maximalist US demands. So to put it another way, the Trump administration sought to lay the groundwork to compete in a new arms race while increasing the likelihood of such a context. And the projected financial cost of the Trump administration's approach is staggering and growing. The administration's fiscal year 2021 budget request of $44.5 billion to sustain and upgrade the US nuclear arsenal was a 19% increase over the previous year. And this dramatic increase was propelled in part by cost overruns in programs inherited by the Trump administration and the cost of the additional capabilities the administration proposed. The budget for the National Nuclear Security Administration, or NNSA in particular, has exploded under the Trump administration. The FY 2021 request for NNSA weapons activities calls for $15.6 billion, an astounding increase of 25% above the 2020 appropriation, and $2.8 billion more than planned in the FY 2020 budget requests. The FY 2021 request is nearly 70%, I repeat, 70% higher than the Obama administration's final request for NNSA weapons activities. Over the next several decades, total spending on the arsenal is likely to top $1.5 trillion, and the biggest modernization bills have yet to come due. Now, though some argue that Russian and Chinese nuclear force advancements and aggressive behavior require maintaining the status quo, the reality is that the current nuclear weapons spending plans pose a major threat to other national security priorities more relevant to countering Moscow and Beijing and assuring allies. For example, in order to accommodate the massive increase for NNSA weapons activities, the Navy was forced to cut a second Virginia-class attack submarine from its FY 2021 budget submission. As former Air Force Chief of Staff General David Goldfein warned in July, the defense budget is not large enough to buy new nuclear and conventional forces at the same time. Flat spending on defense is likely to be a best-case scenario over the next several years. Now, President-elect Biden has indicated that he supports charting a different path for the nuclear arsenal. He has said that the United States, quote, does not need new nuclear weapons, end quote, and that his, quote, administration will work to maintain a strong, credible deterrent while reducing our reliance and excessive expenditure on nuclear weapons, end quote. The failure of the Trump administration to defend the United States against the coronavirus pandemic demands a rethinking of how we define national security. The Biden administration should move the United States toward a nuclear strategy that reflects a narrower role for nuclear weapons, is more stabilizing, reduces the risk of unintended escalation, raises the nuclear threshold, and is more affordable. As I detailed in a report published last spring, adjusting unnecessary, obsolete, and dangerous planning assumptions would enable changes to the current nuclear modernization effort and could produce scores of billions of dollars of savings to redirect to higher priority national security needs, while still allowing the United States to maintain a credible nuclear triad. Such higher priority needs include pandemic defense and response, maintaining the US military's technological edge, shoring up the US conventional military position in East Asia, and combating the increasingly costly impacts to the Defense Department of climate change. Now, before turning it back to Aaron, I want to address a couple of the arguments that the Pentagon often makes to downplay the fiscal challenge posed by the modernization plans. Perhaps the most oft-heard claim is that even at its peak in the late 2020s, spending on nuclear weapons is affordable because it will only consume roughly 6.4% of total Pentagon spending. But this figure is misleading in my view for several reasons. For starters, the figure doesn't include spending at the NNSA, which of course is part of the National Defense or Function 050 budget. When NNSA spending is included, nuclear weapons already account for 6% of the total FY 2021 National Defense Budget request. And given the rate at which the NNSA's budget is exploding, probable future cost overruns in the delivery system modernization programs, and the likelihood of flat overall defense budgets at best for the foreseeable future, it is conceivable that spending on nuclear weapons could actually approach 9 or even 10% of national defense spending in the late 2020s and early 2030s. Regardless, even 6% of a budget as large as the Pentagon's is an enormous amount of money. By comparison, the March 2013 congressionally mandated sequester reduced national defense spending minus exempt military personnel accounts by 7%. Military leaders and lawmakers, as we all know, repeatedly describe the sequester as devastating. Moreover, a better measure of the opportunity costs of prioritizing nuclear modernization is to compare spending on that modernization to overall Defense Department acquisition spending. The Pentagon requested $17.7 billion for nuclear weapons research, development, and procurement in FY 2021, and this amount already accounts for 7.3% of total requested Pentagon acquisition spending. And while the Pentagon projected as of its FY 21 request a decline in total acquisition spending over the next 5 years, nuclear acquisition spending is primed for a major increase. Finally, Pentagon officials also repeatedly claim that unless they get every penny that they are asking for to modernize the arsenal will begin to erode into obsolescence. But this is a false choice. The right question is whether the current approach is necessary, sustainable, and safe, especially in the absence of any negotiated restraints on the US and Russian nuclear arsenals, which would be the case if New START is allowed to expire. And the right answer, in our view, is that the administration's current approach is unnecessary, unsustainable, and unsafe, and must be rethought. Back over to you, Aaron.
All right, thanks, Kingston. I think that sets the road pretty well for us here. And folks, remember the Q&A button. You can feel free to submit some questions there right away. We've already got a couple in the hopper there. You mentioned the budget, and because if anyone knows anything about defense news, you know that we like writing about the budget. I want to start there. You know, as you said, everyone expects the budget to be effectively flat, if not drawn down, even under the Trump second administration that was expected. Certainly under a Biden administration, that seems to be the likely path forward. We know the nuclear budget, from one estimate, could be upwards of 1.3 trillion over the next 30 years. In January of 2019, CBO, which does this every 2 years, said it's almost 500 million, $500 million over the next decade. That's likely to increase in their next round of this math, which I assume will come out hopefully in January. There's a lot of different nuclear programs going on. So I want to ping you on, which of the programs, if you were in charge of doing this, would you look to maybe cut, resize, maybe cancel outright? One that comes to mind, obviously, and maybe the easiest place to start is the W93 warhead, which was a creation of the Trump administration that a number of Democrats have already said they don't support, and is pretty early on right now in the development. But is that the place to start? Would you look at the LRSO, the strike missile, maybe something with the ICBMs? What do you think?
So let me break this into a few different levels and rounds of decision that I think are going to face the new administration. So first, however President-elect Biden and his team choose to proceed on a review of US nuclear policy and posture, and perhaps that's a subject to which we can return with what the right way to go is there. It seems unlikely to me that they will have had time to lay out issues and options for decision, to say nothing about making actual decisions on changes to policy, force structure, and spending before they need to decide what to do with the FY22 budget requests. And the request will certainly be delayed beyond the norm of early February. I mean, that's the norm for an incoming, for a change in administration, but probably not delayed beyond the spring. And so, and I'm assuming, and though we don't know for sure, that the Biden team will want to make some adjustments to the DoD budget proposal that they inherit from the Trump team. And hopefully one of the scoops you're working on right now, Aaron, is trying to get a sense of what the top line number the Trump administration is proposing if they don't release it publicly for all of us as they've suggested. And so within the nuclear modernization program, the Air Force's ground-based strategic deterrent program, or GBSE, to build a new ICBM system, and the NNSA nuclear weapons activities account, which I talked about, are slated to receive significant increases in fiscal year 2022. And the Air Force is also planning to award the development contract for the long-range standoff missile to replace the current fleet of nuclear-armed air-launched cruise missiles next May. So personally, I think it would behoove the Biden administration not to proceed full steam ahead with these efforts pending the outcome of its own review. So I think it should look at hitting the pause button, freezing, for example, funding for the GBSD program at the fiscal year 2021 request level, and NNSA weapons activities at the level projected for FY 2022, as of the FY20 budget request would avoid at least $4 billion in expenditures that the Biden administration could put toward other national security priorities. Now, whether these actions could pass muster in Congress with a GOP-controlled Senate and a narrower Democratic majority in the House remains to be seen, but I think the Biden administration would have a strong case to make. Now, in terms of things that the Biden team will look at in the context of its own nuclear policy or posture review, I mean, one of those obviously is going to be the structure and size of the force. And in 2013, the Obama administration determined that the security of the United States and its allies and partners could be safely maintained while pursuing up to a 1/3 reduction in deployed nuclear weapons from the level established in New START. So the case, in my view, for such a reduction remains strong. The level of Russian strategic forces has not changed since then, and China's total nuclear arsenal has grown only modestly. And so though the Biden administration should seek such a reduction in concert with Russia, I think it will need to weigh whether to give Moscow veto power over the appropriate size and structure of the U.S. nuclear arsenal. So if the Biden administration did pursue a 1/3 reduction, whether that's in conjunction with Russia as part of a New START follow-on or independently, right now New START limits the United States to 700 deployed and 800 deployed and non-deployed delivery systems. In the event it decided to produce, say, a 1/3 cut to both warheads and delivery systems, you might be looking at a force of 10 ballistic missile submarines instead of 12, or a force of 300 ICBMs instead of 400. So those are issues that the new team will need to look at. With respect to further changes to the modernization program, the Biden administration will and should, of course, take a very close look at the rationale for the additions the Trump administration proposed, especially the 2 additional low-yield options that you mentioned. But though these may seem like low-hanging fruit, I think the complicating factor with respect to the W76-2 in particular is that it has already been fielded, and removing it from deployment wouldn't actually save you any money. With respect to the SLICM-N, the nuclear-armed SLICM, my apologies, an analysis of alternatives for that program is still ongoing. But if the new administration does decide to retain the W76-2 and the nuclear SLICM development effort, I would argue it should consider how doing so might allow for deeper cuts to other parts of the triad. For example, a key rationale for the LRSO is to provide a low-yield option that can penetrate air defenses. Well, given that the W76-2 can provide that option, does proceeding with the LRSO and its accompanying warhead at an estimated cost of $25 billion, only a relatively small portion of which has been spent so far, make sense? And then likewise, the Biden administration will have no choice but to reevaluate the NNSA's warhead and infrastructure plans. The plans face major affordability and execution challenges. Suffices to say there's far too much program and not enough money. And if you support prioritizing the China challenge, then sacrificing a Virginia-class submarine every year for the next 10 to 15 years to pay for increases for NNSA is probably not a good trade. And so clear candidates for scaling back include the W93, as you mentioned, plans to expand pit production to 80 pits per year, retaining the B-83 and building a new domestic enrichment facility. And then finally, with respect to the TRIDAV delivery systems, I think the future of the ICBM leg and the GBSE program in particular merits very close scrutiny. I did an op-ed for Defense News in February, making the case for why the United States can continue to maintain a credible ICBM leg of the triad by extending the life of a smaller number, say 300 instead of 400 Minuteman IIIs for at least the next several decades. A key rationale being if the role of the ICBM force is to deter a large-scale Russian nuclear attack by requiring Russia to have to destroy hundreds of missiles in order to wipe out that leg, then that so-called nuclear sponge mission can be done more cheaply by extending the life of the Minuteman III as opposed to building a completely new missile system.
So, I mean, there's a lot of things that you brought up there, and actually it was good because you hit a couple of the questions that we've got, and please keep sending those in, folks. I think then the next place to go is, if the Biden administration is going to consider its path forward, uh, does there need to be a nuclear posture review? And is that even the right structure anymore? Because we know the nuclear posture review tends to take about a year. By then, you're already into your second budget. Almost you're planning now for your third budget by the time it comes out. Uh, is there maybe a better way to get at that more holistically?
Right. I think that's a very important question. I mean, each administration since the end of the Cold War has done a standalone nuclear posture review. Two of them were required by Congress. The other two, the executive branch did on its own volition. I mean, I think the benefits of an NPR are that it can focus the attention of the civilian and military leadership on the issue of nuclear policy and strategy. Give a new administration the opportunity to put its own stamp on U.S. nuclear policy, and then, of course, providing a subsequent roadmap for implementing, any changes called for by the detailed review. But there's nothing sacrosanct about doing a nuclear posture review, or at least in my view, there shouldn't be. And I think, one of the things that President Biden should do in his first 100 days is to issue a presidential decision directive that sets the frame for and provides guidance on the content and process of a new review of U.S. nuclear policy and posture. But I think the president-elect and his advisors should consider whether another standalone NPR led by the Pentagon that takes a year, as you mentioned, to complete is the right approach. And an alternative might be to conduct a more comprehensive deterrence review that reflects the more, and I think the buzzwords are, multi and cross-domain, nature of the strategic environment. And also, I think more starkly highlights the trade-offs between nuclear and conventional forces in a more constrained budget environment. And the Biden administration, I think, should also recognize that the longer it takes to conduct any review, as you suggested, the less time the administration will have to attempt to implement any changes to U.S. policy.
So we just got the 5-minute warning heads up from our lovely producer in the background here. So I think what I'm going to do is try to wrap up a couple of questions here for Kingston, because we've gotten a few from different people about Congress and how to essentially, make this work with Congress. Will Congress, if it's controlled by the GOP, allow Biden to cut some of this stuff? How much does concerns of industrial base in different districts, which certainly I think plays into the ICBM discussion, how does that play out? And I'm going to throw in my own aspect of that too, which is just broadly speaking, when the Obama modernization plan was rolled out, it was essentially a trade. It was nuclear modernization of weaponry in exchange for arms control agreements. And we've seen a lot of those arms control agreements, frankly, be tossed out over the last couple of months, or last couple of years rather, while nuclear modernization has increased, as you've noted. So how does that play into Congress and the relationships now? And so I guess the question is, Congress, how's this going to work?
So let me take the latter piece of the Congress question mark question that you just put to me and sort of rolled together. So it's definitely true that there was a compromise back in 2010 when the Biden administration was seeking Senate advice and consent for the New START resolution ratification. But I think the word consensus, which some have used, is probably a bit too strong of a description. And I also think it's true that the compromise is coming undone, and the scope and cost of the modernization plans have grown significantly since the Senate approved New START in 2010, and especially over the past 4 years. And the costs and risks of these plans have been, exacerbated by the Trump administration's trampling of existing arms control agreements and failure as well to put forward a realistic strategy to replace and build upon those agreements. And so more and more spending on nuclear weapons without an arms control framework, that bounds the U.S. and Russian nuclear arsenals, I think is a recipe for greater insecurity. So I think frankly, I think the previous administration's disdain for arms control should further embolden the Biden administration to seek to restrain the excessive and unsustainable plans it's inheriting. Now, with respect to what the congressional debate is going to look at in the event of the Biden administration proposing changes to parts of the modernization effort, I think that that remains to be seen. Clearly, if the Senate remains in GOP hands, there's likely to be opposition to those changes. We know the House is going to remain in Democratic hands, but with a much narrower majority. So I think it remains to be seen how that's going to play out. I can't predict it. It will certainly be a contentious debate. It will certainly be controversial, but it's going to depend on lots of different factors. Just speaking, given that the Trump administration proposed several additions to the Obama program of record, you can make the argument that scaling back those changes would be an easier potentially political lift than making changes to the program that the programs that Trump actually inherited from Obama. But again, I think it's going to be a controversial debate, but one in my view, for all the reasons that I laid out, that the Obama administration, or that the Biden administration, should not shy away from.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we're getting the hook here. I wish I had a lot more time. We do have more questions, and obviously Kingston has plenty of thoughts that we could keep tapping. But want to thank Kingston for his time. Want to thank all of you for joining us today. And we hope everyone enjoys the rest of the conference. There's a lot of great speakers still coming up, so please stick around. Thanks so much.